My journey begins in the same place as Jean-Paul Sartre did. You have to begin with the understanding that you are a sexual organism. And this implies a number of things about your condition. Usually, when people in my age group are interested in having sex, they seek advice on how to attract. And the advice that they invariably receive is you have to meet the right person. Now that's a vague term, but its meanings, which are multiple and therefore vague, every one of them is actually pretty specific. It's only vague because there are so many different ways you could interpret it. One interpretation of the right person is that there's literally incarnate in the flesh right now a physical soulmate, specifically for you. This is an old Platonic idea, who is waiting and yearning to be found by you or to find you and is searching for you. And it's the moment that you begin to search for her or for him, you will begin a journey which will consummate in your falling in love. And then once the two of you fall in love, there's no tearing the two of you apart. You are wedded on a soul level. Several lifetimes you might spend together in sexual bliss, just emotional harmony, sort of something close to nirvana. And you'll just be ecstatic throughout your lives. You'll raise your children to believe in love, and just everyone around you will just be jazzed by the sheer unequivocal, health of your relationship. That's a Platonic idea. That's a very idealized view. But the more practical, Aristotelian contemporary view is that there are a number of people in the world with whom you are theoretically well-adjusted. You are compatible with them according to a number of criteria. That might be, personality type, could be astrological, it could be psychological, it could be similar ambitions, similar goals, similar politics, sort of a similar course in life, which is somehow still imbued with spiritual significance, but it's not as unrealistic. There's a greater chance of proving this right. Now, just because something can be more easily proven doesn't mean that it's more absolutely true. It just means it's practical for human beings in our kind of society to go about it that way and to say, I'm looking for someone with these qualities. But this is individual. This is someone who's right for me. I don't mean by my demands to suggest that all the world has to be this way. I don't need all men or all women to be this way. I just need to find someone who's already, of his or her own volition, this way that I can relate with. And then, if all goes well, if the methods work, we'll be together. Now that sounds like an even better plan, doesn't it? But in reality, neither of those plans work. And what the pursuit of romantic love evidences is just how much bullshit there is moving back and forth between men and women. This will be a lecture on heterosexual relationships specifically, because the intersexual communication between the genders is just incredibly fucked up. Now, many people start, not with the heart, but with the pelvis. They begin by pursuing sex, and in the process they find love. This is usually the narrative of a lot of romantic comedies, especially from the male perspective. But as it turns out, quite a few females are much the same way. In my case, the Platonic ideal of finding the one is not so unrealistic, in fact, because the way that I actually became interested in sex again was through having found her. I found someone out of a multitude of female friends that I really genuinely wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And I could no longer deny the role that sexuality had to play in our relationship and in my relationships with other women. So I really wanted to know, what's it like to have sex? Because it just had never really occurred to me before as a virtue, as an ideal, but I saw the desire, the drive for human beings to do this playing a significant part in politics, in psychology, in relationships, and in, people's ideological and philosophical views and outlooks and religion. I thought, yeah, maybe it's time. And as an artist, I should be able to know what this is like. And that became impossible. There was just no way for me, going out to these clubs, to these bars, to these schools, to these jobs, to these libraries. There's just no way of really meeting someone without really desperately pursuing these people, and usually with disastrous results. And every time that I got into trouble for the pursuit, I was lectured on social cues. This idea that you could somehow just read someone's face and instantly know what this person is interested in, and whether or not that person's interested in you. And my counter-argument is, no one is interested in me. That's why I'm so desperate. Come on. There are no social cues that demonstrate that a woman wants to have sex with you. I've never seen it. Why should I believe it? Maybe it's a conspiracy. After all, why would I be any different from anyone else? If I'm pursuing something that's so universal that people can instantly read my intention, then surely I can't be that different from any other men. And so my journey kind of came back around full circle, whereas it started with finding the right person and then becoming interested in sex through that. Which is like, that's the high road. That's the ideal. That made me feel good morally as a person. It became the pursuit of sex and the conclusion that, well, I have to find the right person again. Now, the other person that I was in love with has passed away. And I still mourn her loss, but I can't let that get me down. She would want me to live a fulfilling life. Whatever her own interest in her life or lack thereof was. I'm not going to go into that now. I've gone into it plenty of times before. So, I think, she loved me. We didn't consummate our love, but that's okay. It just wasn't right. But there might be someone else out there for me. And especially considering that I have all this experience now, in loving, and loving with great sacrifice and great pain, I'm quite qualified. There's absolutely no reason for me to suppose that person was the only one. In fact, the less that I suppose that, the more that I suppose that there could be many women out there just waiting for someone like me, maybe for just a short amount of time. The more practical I become, and the more masculine I become, the more well-adjusted to Aristotelian scientific society. In many ways, also the more extroverted I have to become. But, there's always a suspicion that, well, maybe she was the one, or maybe now there's another one somewhere. And I just have to find her. But in encountering a number of women and making friends with them, I encountered this major pitfall, and that's the topic of this discussion. And that is that of the friend zone. What does friend zone mean? What it means is that women tend to categorize men who they choose to associate with, based into two categories. You see, aside from the distinction of whom I wish to associate with and whom I don't, there is a distinction between men that I wish to be friends with and men that I wish to partner with. And it's extremely controversial, because it implies that you can be qualified enough to be a friend, but you will never be so good of a friend that the woman will take an active role in your sexual fulfillment. Now, obviously, men who take active roles in my sexual fulfillment are not having sexual relations with me. I'm heterosexual. But they're still would do anything within their power as men to help me to find a partner. Women have a different power over me, and they can be held to a different standard. A woman that I'm interested in, who's also my friend, would be insulting me by suggesting that I'm not qualified to be her lover. And she might say, no, I'm perfectly qualified, but just not to be her lover, just to be someone else's lover, right? And this is bullshit, of course. This is quite obvious that you're setting an example, a precedent, that other people will look to. And even though they shouldn't look to it, the tendency for them to repeat the rejection is actually demonstrably quite great. And you are participating in that by saying that even if I'm a great friend to you, and I am objectively qualified to love a woman, such as yourself, you must abstain. You must be an exception. And I must tolerate that, even though you're sexually active with other men. This is the friend zone. And there's nothing really friendly about that. But, of course, there's a counter-argument to this criticism. Because, yeah, I might look at this in an Aristotelian way and see things as virtue. I might take a rejection personally. I might think, if I'm good enough to be a friend, why am I not good enough to be a lover? And if you are truly my friend, why would you not do everything in your power to help me with my sexual development when I'm offering you the same service? And this can work in our heterosexual way. Well, the counter-argument is, well, look, I mean, you've had to turn people down before, haven't you? You've been really close with women before, and the both of you have had to conclude that you were better off as friends than as lovers, and you felt like that was a deeply sacred thing to be respected, and that's true. Twice that has happened. Once when I had to be the one to make that distinction, and once where the other one had to be the one. But in both instances, those women, in fact, self-identified, at least eventually, as being asexual. And the one who rejected me, so to speak, the same one I was in love with, you know, the reason we never consummated our love, well, she had already made up her mind that she was asexual by the time that I verbalized my feelings. It's not as though she didn't know those feelings beforehand, but it just didn't work out. I mean, part of that was someone's fault. I'm not going to name any names, but part of that was just blind luck. And so those are very exceptional circumstances. Asexuality is quite rare. Because, as I will demonstrate statistically, most adults in the United States are sexually active. And asexuals in a liberal individual society, they don't really have a great sense of pressure to be in sexual relationships anymore. Well, okay. But that's part of the problem with the counter argument. But there's another deeper issue here, and it concerns strategy. It concerns statistical objectivity. You see, a woman categorizing men as either friends or lovers is limiting her choices by so doing. And you can be willing to bet that a number of men, once they've been put in the friend zone once, will very quickly lose interest in this woman altogether. And it is not entirely bad of them to do that. It's not entirely good of them to do that either. There's also the other complication of whether or not women choose to associate with men in general, or how they categorize men that they choose to associate with as opposed to men that they don't choose to associate with. Theoretically, this distinction should be made based upon character. But you can hardly judge a person's character upon first meeting. What you can do, apparently, is judge that person's intentions. But those intentions would largely be perceived based upon one's own intentions. You can only really know that someone's into you sexually if you yourself are already choosing to view this person either as a prospective mate or not. So, in many ways, getting to know women for a man, a contemporary man, is like an involvement in a bureaucracy, where before you can even be considered worthy of being a lover, you have to be considered worthy of being an associate. And then once you become an associate, you will be either classified as a lover or as a friend. But the decision of whether or not you're qualified to be a lover or a friend has already been made before you became an associate. And becoming an associate actually depended upon two things. One of them was whether or not you were qualified to be a lover, and the other was how badly you wanted to be a lover. In other words, if you are desperate to have sex, and the woman has already made up her mind that she does not want to have sex with you, she might not even want to be your friend. And it's not just that your ability to be a friend might outweigh or has to outweigh your ability to be a lover in order for you to become an associate. But in fact, your ability to be a friend, your ability to even be recognized as a human being worth of a woman's time, in many instances, will depend upon how desperately you might be seeking sex, regardless of even any sort of overt statement that you make about your own intent. And to the same extent that you have not had sex, this will in fact impact your ability to make any sort of association with the opposite gender, including totally neutral ones, based entirely upon an assessment of your character which is made largely without your consent or knowledge, and for which you cannot even answer because it is so covert. You might not even know. You might even be sued by a company for sexual harassment and never even know who it was that reported you. Now that is far crazier than anything that Plato ever said about soulmates. And Plato said some pretty far out there shit. But okay, let's say you become an associate within a woman's company, so to speak. If you'll pardon me, my wordplay, because it's so bureaucratic, you think this must be some sort of sick corporation or something. But no, it's the female psyche, apparently. Well, even at this point. Your ability to be or to become a sexual partner should theoretically be a toss-up, right? I mean, look at it this way. Statistically, there are about 51% of our global population is female. 49% of our global population is male. Now, supposing for the sake of argument that everyone in the human population were heterosexual, if most of the population, a large majority of the population, wanted to have one monogamous relationship, and only a select few wanted to have several polyamorous relationships, say that there was a government in place, a global government that made sure of this, then yeah, in some universe, everyone in the world would become sexually satisfied with just one partner. And that partner could be considered a platonic soulmate. But that one universe would be one in the trillions of possibilities. No, more than trillions of possibilities. And that's exactly the likelihood that you have of finding the one platonic soulmate in the world, unless you believe that there is some sort of intelligent, godlike, or even divine entity who oversees every single one of your romantic adventures and will ensure that so long as you abide by his or her code, you will find the one. You see why a practical, contemporary person and a strong, independent woman would have by necessity to include a lot of men in her realm of consideration. That would just be the practical thing to do. So if you had to categorize all men either into friends or lovers, for one thing, you'd eliminate the reject category altogether. In other words, every man you would associate with, just either as a friend or a lover. Because obviously excluding people from your company entirely based upon your own sexual preferences is Kafkaesque and absurd, and you're going to hurt yourself as much as you hurt them. You're going to miss out on a lot of people that way. But you'd have to classify all the men of the world into one of these two categories, and it would be best for you, therefore, to create a 50-50 split. For half the people in the world to be a prospective friend, and for half of the people of the world to be a prospective mate. That would at least make this structure a little more humane to you as well. So what that would mean is that every man that you encounter, there's a 50-50 chance that you would at least be interested in sleeping with him. And if he's interested in sleeping with you, then there's a great chance that will happen. And you could lead a very sexually healthy and satisfying life that way, with multiple partners, multiple experiences, and then eventually you'd find the one. You'd find someone with whom it just works, and it's so wonderful in theory. It's so wonderful for me to consider as a man, because I realize this. If every encounter between a woman and a man has a 50-50 chance of romantic success, and I am interested in romantic success, I am open, I'm vulnerable, I'm ready to lose my virginity at the age of 28, which seems like a totally appropriate time. That doesn't seem too early, does it? No, I think it's good. I think it's good. Then theoretically, 50% of the women that I've approached who can immediately read my intentions will have been successful sexual encounters. You can't blame me for starting early, right? Or maybe from some perspective I'm a late bloomer. But, I'm just in my 20s, It's okay. It's my late 20s. Yeah, that sounds like a narrative that would work. That sounds really healthy. And in that case, the friend zone, I could live with that. 50% of women, they're just not into it. They just don't feel that way about me. Okay. I've still got all those other women to choose from, and I'm certainly not that picky. I'm rather easy and somewhat desperate, and that must be a wonderful set of qualities to have. So available, so interested in the public health, not just my own, right? I mean, the only reason why I wouldn't be living it up at the age of 28 would be because of religious restrictions, right? So, if I have to go to a rave and I'm rejected 12 times, 12 women don't even want to dance with me. Not even, as a two-step or something. Well, maybe Aristotle was wrong. Maybe there is just someone out there for me. And I have to find her desperately, because there's only one person in this whole world. I need to consult the gods. I need to learn the I Ching. I need to be reading my horoscope every day. I need to be doing tarot cards. I need to be constantly revising my views on sexuality, making sure that I'm vulnerable to the information that this intelligent logos of the universe is trying to feed me. Through media, through my instincts, through this feeling of arousal that I get whenever I see a woman in a skirt or high heels, and I just can't rationalize what it is about that just makes me so much want to put babies inside of her. But it's okay because everyone goes through it, right? Well, there are a few problems that I encounter along this desperate journey in pursuit of a soulmate. If you really honestly believed that there was only one person out there for you, or only a few people, then you'd have eventually to wonder about this as well. When I meet her, when I meet someone who looks like her, who talks like her, who, who's nice to me, who considers me worthy of her time, even if it's just for a few minutes, or maybe even a few hours, how desperately I must put everything else in life on hold just to pursue this opportunity. I mean, I would have to redirect all of my attention to this person just on the off chance that she's the one. But that's okay, right? I mean, that's what she would do. She would be sympathetic to that. After all, she knows that God does not want us just fucking around with everyone. God wanted us to find our soulmate, our ideal. That's the only reason why she would reject me, because I don't live up to quite that ideal. It was a false alarm, but that's okay. Because I know that she will give me a chance to prove myself. And I never need to worry about being banned from a restaurant or sued for sexual harassment or treated like a creep. But what does it evidence that all those things can happen? And they happen for the same reasons that other men who break exactly the same rules for the sake of love are successful. What does it mean? Couldn't be that I'm unattractive, could it? That's ridiculous. That's relative. That depends entirely on the individual. The reason you can't harass people is because of individual preferences, individual realities. What do they teach us in corporations? That person's subjective experience is that person's reality, right? You're not objectively unattractive. You're not objectively ugly or objectively creepy. But why do these women that I find that I think maybe that's the one that I'll get laid with? Why do they treat me with such aversion? No pun on aversion. Could it be that maybe they are so sexually active that they just have lost interest in men like me? What do you mean? What could it be that statistically speaking, 97% of the adult population of the United States has had a sexual experience before, and I am in the 3% that hasn't? That's fucking nuts! Who printed this shit? This is propaganda of some sort. There's no way that 97% of the adult population has had sex? That's insane! How could they possibly manage this? But the more that you talk to people, the more you realize, yeah, they believe it. Some of them had it when they were 16. And here I am, year after year, wondering, will this be the year that a girl will give me a blowjob? Maybe next Valentine's Day. Something's not right here in this situation. Sorry for making things personal, but I think something isn't adding up. That statistic makes it look easy. And as far as I'm aware, having sex is the single hardest thing in the world. I mean, you can learn how to program in C, or you can write a symphony. You can prepare food. You can theoretically drive a car. You can get good at video games. You can get good at swimming and running and jumping. You can do all of these things, but putting your dick inside a woman consensually? I mean, that's the cream of the crop. Only the finest men will be qualified for that. And if 97% of them were qualified for that, then what does that make you? I think that this is insane. And I think about the friend zone. Okay, so the Platonic way of thinking has failed us. It's failed us because most people aren't even willing to pursue it. And logically so. It's too great a gamble. We don't know that there's a God that can make something that phenomenal as finding the one soulmate in the world for you happen. But the Aristotelian way of thinking, the virtue of the mean, the average way of doing things, which on average people do, well, it must be working for 97% of the population, right? I mean, and that statistic, that only counts for one time having sex. That could be one time out of 1,000 rejections, right? So theoretically, I just haven't been pursuing sex that ardently, right? But do people in this economy really have time, that much time, to pursue it? Is so much of an individual's life warped around trying to attract the right mate that the culture itself has adapted a view of what is objectively attractive? And I'm in the 3% of people who don't meet that because they don't understand it. And what I consider attractive in a woman is not what a woman would consider attractive in me. Well, no, that can't be right. You mean to say that, about 97% of the population has had sex at least once. And I'm not really different from them because I've had it one less time than that. But they're all just as desperate as I am. They're all going through the same difficulties, the same frustrations in trying to understand each other. I think the quote that comes to mind is, "Ain't nobody got time for that." I mean, people are just too busy to be rejected that many times. Rejection is a depressing thing after about the 100th time. And it's just not feasible. You've got to think, if that many people on average get rejected that often, 97% of the population wouldn't have lost their virginity. And so many teenagers will not have reached that state. I mean, it would take someone until one's 30s to find the one person who wants to have sex with you. Right? I mean, if desperation is considered unattractive and unsympathetic, then how could that many people be that desperate? You know? I mean, if I walked into a bar and I saw a girl and I thought, this one's going to be my soulmate, and I've been through about a dozen other clients just that week. You know, if she's been through 100 men and still hasn't gotten laid, why would she think I'm a creep? Is she just angry at men in general? She must surely be sympathetic to my plight. Even if her own is worse. No, the only reason why she would reject me would be because her plight isn't that bad. Because in general, if she wants to have sex, she can. That sounds great. But what about me too? And this is what brings us back to the discussion of the friend zone. The friend zone theory, as I've stated, would suggest that 50% of the women that you will approach will want to say yes to you. 50%. And at a time when our information technology was not so developed that you could systematically and statistically warrant this, any rational philosopher of the 19th century, which was also a very romantic time, which is where we get our concept of romance from, any one of them would have probably come to this conclusion. Only the crazy people like Friedrich Nietzsche would say, you guys are full of yourselves. But I think 50% of women should be having sex with me, statistically. And I can't find one. Something is brewing. Something's rotten in the state of this situation. What is it? Maybe, just maybe, these women are making their distinctions between friend and lover according to a criteria. And they're doing this mimetically and virally, in the same way that our memes on the internet spread. In other words, the problem with the 50% probability argument that I've come up with is that some men will customarily, time and time again, be put into the friend zone category, if even that far, based on a set of criteria that they alone possess, for which they will be held responsible, so much so that the consent of the other party does not weigh upon that other party's responsibility. The ability to get laid depends entirely upon the other party giving you consent. But how is it that if the other party is an autonomous agent, somehow you are personally responsible for that person's rejection? It would have to be that you possess a quality that immediately drives people away, or you lack a quality that will invariably take precedence over you in a competitive market. So much so that women will come to the same conclusion about you independently of each other. Nonetheless, with conspiracy, which is not just a play on the words cons and piracy, it is a play on the words con and spirit, working together in spirit. Doesn't mean that they're all, holding secret meetings together, but if two chicks who happen to know about you by their own means happen to meet, they would both agree that that guy is really creepy. And that would be enough reason to call him that. It's just the fact that they agree. Just intuitively. They just get that vibe. And nothing more is necessary to systematically oppress that person. How does this happen? That the friend zone becomes the permanent state. Now you could bullshit me and tell me, look, if you don't like being in the friend zone, we don't have to be friends. I would respect you so much more as a man if you went out and you just found someone to give you what you want and you were honest about what you wanted. But that person never exists. I am always in the friend zone at the most, if I'm even that lucky. And the longer it goes on, the greater my desperation to get out of it, the more I'm pushed out of it the other way. I can't even become an associate of a woman. To the same extent that I just need 15 fucking minutes of her time, literally. Just to feel like I'm a qualified man and not a scapegoat. 3% of the population carrying the sins and the consequences of 97 of the percent. And I alone, the virgin, who has to deal with the consequences of other people's unvirginal behavior. And to the same extent that class, that privileged class of people, is teaching itself to embrace their own sexuality, I will never be able to see the better side of it. It will always be a slave to its consequences. That sounds fine. Yeah, that's really liberal and empowering to the individual. The thought that any one of us could wind up in the situation that all the women of the world will be part of a trend that systematically oppresses us. But thankfully, I know my feminism. What is the fundamental ground of feminism? The fundamental ground of feminism is that women are capable of reason. We can trust them to have jobs. We can trust them to not only raise families, but lead families. They can be trusted to wear pants and put them on one leg at a time. they can take any career that they wish because they are capable of reason. Sure, maybe Sylvia Plath didn't care about reason, but she's dead. Women are rational beings just as much as men are. And so, it's not as though they're genetically programmed to reject you based on some sort of bullshit that hasn't been relevant to our evolution for thousands of years. No, they're just participating in a trend because they consider that to be what is socially just. Any one of them can be questioned and inspired to change that trend. And by her example, to include you not just in this society, but in the start of a more humane society that makes rational sense and satisfies the human longing for love and sensibility. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great if every time that some bitch told me that you just don't have what it takes, I could ask why? And I could make a case for myself and tell her all the things I've done, all the struggles I've gone through, and really show her why any ordinary person with ordinary healthy emotions would just be moved and aroused with sympathy towards me, just like in the movies. Wouldn't that be awesome? But it doesn't happen. Why doesn't it happen? I mean, you can't tell me that's because I'm not muscular enough. For instance, even the men who are privileged enough to be attractive, they don't know why they're privileged. I mean, they seem to think that being a man and being sexy has to involve drinking a lot, handling your alcohol, going to UFC fight nights, going to the gym 3 times a week or so, at the very least. Getting those gains, bro. Most women don't care for these things. When there's a UFC fight night in downtown San Diego, the bars are packed with guys, dudes. And the pub crawls are completely saturated with women. Because the chicks have to find something better to do with their time than stay at home with the kids. I know this. These are not the kind of people who would honestly be able to say that they can understand the appeal of physical strength or violence. They're not following that example. They must consider it rather ridiculous, confusing and mysterious. So why would it be attractive to them? Simply put, there's no rational reason. It's not an example that they're willing to follow in many instances. So why would they need for men specifically to follow it? You mean to tell me that despite thousands of years of human cultural evolution, women are still biologically retarded? And that they will only be instinctively drawn to someone who, in a different time and place, would have been the alpha male? And that somehow all of civilization is just warped by this female instinct? Well, misogyny would be a totally rational conclusion under that set of circumstances, but I refuse to believe it. This isn't what women find attractive in men. They're not proto-fascists trying to sculpt us into Greek gods. And incidentally, a great deal of Greek gods were themselves sculptors, did not match this description. They didn't look like Ares. They looked more like Hephaestus. They were deformed. They had problems. They weren't perfect by that ideal. But neither was Ares. Ares was an absolute dick. He was a dick to Hephaestus. And where would Ares have been if Hephaestus weren't using his technological know-how to make instruments for the gods? As just one example. You know, the ideal of the muscular, aggressive, but discerning man. The superstition that everything that women claim to want in him will only come after the fact of his physical dexterity and ruthlessness, which is presumed from the outset. I mean, this is not what the contemporary civilized woman who just graduated with a degree in biochemistry believes. I mean, if you were that smart and you knew that much about human anthropology, you'd say this is a problem. Surely our evolution leads to something else. I cannot be so selfish as to simply indulge that part of my psyche in the pursuit of sexual health. So, if that's not the criterion that sets the men apart from the boys, or the lovers apart from the friends, then what is it? Is there some sort of evil force at work that just doesn't want for men like me to get laid? Or is it a benevolent force? Is it maybe that on some level I don't really want to get laid? And I think that I do. And that intellectual fascination with it is just so remote that people are averse to it. Is it perhaps that these women are all searching for a soulmate and they can see that in me and they just know that they would be a disappointment to me? That in a certain sense I'm too good for them. They could pacify my heart by persuading me to be sentimental. Just like that asexual woman who committed suicide did. Is it possible that women are not capable of reason? And that they really make their decisions based on a series of archetypal drives? And that despite my having studied women for a long time, despite my being able to memorize the 9 archetypes of woman, far more quickly than I even memorized the 4 archetypes of man, to that same extent, my ability to understand them comes at the expense of my ability to understand myself as a man. And without that understanding, I will never be able to push all the right buttons to somehow bypass their autonomy in my favor so that they will think that they're still self-responsible, but I can still be held responsible for my sexual success. Could it be that none of what I just said, none of my expounding on the absurdity of the situation even makes sense to most of them? And they're more focused on why my hair is scraggly or my beard. I cannot bring myself to believe that. I cannot bring myself to believe that someone in the millennial generation would be that retarded. But then again, even women that I know who are absorbed in science and reason will still be so illogical as to blame me personally for my inability to get laid. Even though these radical individualists clearly are very aware of their own autonomy and consent. And if women are autonomous, consenting creatures, they are totally responsible for whether or not they give me a chance. You'd have to be nuts to have to conclude that even though you are totally autonomous, as are all women, my inability to bypass your autonomy and to steal your consent is my fault. That just doesn't work. That's psychotic. But I mean, and by a certain age, you must have thought it through. You must have realized that, wait. I can't hold this person responsible for being a virgin. Because unless he's a rapist, he doesn't have control over that situation. Women have control over the situation. I have control over the situation. I'm autonomous. His inability to do this has as much to do with me as with anyone else. So what is it? Is all of life just one big game? Am I supposed to be putting on a show? Acting the part of someone whose part they're constantly rewriting? Have I been following the wrong set of rules? am I really born to be a douchebag? By definition, someone who is just a toy. Someone who's just performing his way through life. But most societies fairly extroverted. Extroversion is supposed to be more closely associated with sex than with power. Though the need for aggression in it is greater. So, I mean, is all of society centered around sex in the way that Freud suggested? Why am I, therefore, in the 3% of the world that can't get laid? Is it because I'm thinking about it? Is it because even right now I'm reevaluating my own prejudices and just trying to make some sort of sense of it? Or is there really a God who has something so fantastic reserved for me that he will forbid any woman to come near me in that way? Where was that God when the previous woman committed suicide? Was that really his will? Or is it possible that we need to change our culture? We need to start recognizing that we are participating in a series of trends. That I, as a man, am being held to a certain moral standard which is illogical, which is a trend. And that the women holding me to this standard are also being held to a different standard, which is equally illogical. And that if we are to prove ourselves to be rational adults, we can open up a discussion about how best to revise the heteronormative ideal, not to just run away from it and say, oh, that's heteronormative, so it doesn't matter, because we're all just individuals, but actually acknowledge that, no, there are trends at work here. If we were truly individuals, we wouldn't be having this problem. But there is a conspiracy. It's not necessarily conscious. It's not necessarily natural either. Because usually we think of things that are in the unconscious as expressions of our underlying nature. No. It's an unconscious conspiracy, which is political in nature, but doesn't necessarily mean that anyone's in charge. It's just some bullshit that we're a part of, and we need to change our culture to be more accommodating. Why? Because I say so? Because I don't want to be a virgin for the rest of my life? And it's good that I'm saying it, because usually I protest it. And I'm always waiting for someone to tell me something that I already knew. Something that I need to change about myself just to beat me down. But it never works. It doesn't make me more attractive. I'm already attractive. People just don't know it. I can play 12 instruments. I can speak 2 languages. I'm learning a 3rd fairly quickly. I can write code. I can written books and plays and movie scripts and poems. It can be actually rather funny, demonstrably. I've debated on a national level. You mean to tell me that I'm a beta male? What the fuck's wrong with you? So if I can't get laid, there's a problem. There's a conspiracy against me. Maybe I just intimidate people. Maybe they're shy. They don't want to admit that I'm right. They want it to be their choice. They don't want it to be the right choice. If we went back to a way of thinking where right and wrong are totally the public's business, maybe someone like me could find a mate, could live a life. Because deep down, all the women of the world know that I deserve it. I'm not going to be a sacrificial lamb. 3% of the population. What percentage of the American population in the 1950s were communists? Were they wrong just because they were in the minority? If they represented all of humanity, they were right. And maybe the reason that I'm so rational and so sexy is because I am interested, not just in myself, but in all of humanity. But I will not be a martyr anymore.